Hello, Algebra 1, and welcome to your 3.6 notes for compound inequalities. So what are compound inequalities? Compound inequalities are two inequalities joined together with an and we'll talk about when you see an and or an or. So we're going to start with just talking about or inequalities. So with or inequalities, the solutions will be values that can work for either one of the inequalities. So a real life example of a compound or inequality would be like you can enter the building if you are taller than 5'6", or if you are older than 20. So if you meet one of those two requirements, either you're older than 20 or you're over 5'6", or whatever I said, then you would be able to enter that building. You don't have to meet both qualifications. So it works for one of the two inequalities. So to solve or inequalities, we solve each inequality separately. Then graph on the same number line. The graphs of or inequalities will always be going in opposite directions. Okay, so if you look at number 1, we have an or inequality. You can tell it's an or, honestly, because it says or. Like they're right in the problem, right? It just, you see the word or, and so that's telling me it's an or inequality. You can look at all 4 of these below and you see the word or. That should always be an indicator that these are going to be going in the opposite direction. If they're not going in the opposite direction, you've done something wrong. Go back and check your work. So we start by just solving these each separately. So I look at just my first one, 4x plus 3 is less than -5. I solve that like I've been solving all my other inequalities. So I subtract 3 from both sides. And I get 4x is less than -8. And then divide both sides by 4 to get x by itself. And I get x is less than -2. So then from there, we then are going to solve the next one. We've solved our first one, so we solve our second one completely separate. So I, again, am just trying to solve for x. So I undo anything that's being added or subtracted. So I would subtract 7 from both sides. So then I get -2x. 7 minus 7 cancels, is less than -6. Then to get x by itself, I divide both sides by a -2. We know when we're dividing both sides by a negative number, remember both sides have to be being divided by that negative number, you need to flip the inequality symbol. So this becomes x is greater than 3. So again, that's because we divided both sides by a negative number. Okay, so then let's graph that. I always like to graph it before I write it in interval notation. So to graph it, we're just going to use this number line. You don't have to be exact. I like the tick marks. You don't have to go like -2 and then count to 3. Doesn't matter to me. So we're going to put -2 here. And then 3 here. So this first one is saying x is less than -2. So first question, is it an open or is it a closed circle? Because it's less than, not less than or equal to, it's an open circle. And then less than is going in the negative direction. Okay, and then x is greater than 3. So first question, is it open or closed? And it's open because it's not or equal to. Looks like I need a new green. And then greater than is going in the positive direction. So it would be going up. So to write that in interval notation, remember, I look at the graph, I use the graph to help me, and I'm looking at it from left to right. And so it's going from negative infinity, right? It's going in the negative direction forever. And then it ends at -2. So we start with that negative infinity to -2. Then there's a gap. Now, because there's this gap, we use this symbol that's a U. Now, that U is a symbol, it represents union, or it also represents or. So this symbol that represents this symbol that represents or. So anytime, like basically I always say, like anytime there's a gap in between two parts, you always put a U to represent that it's continuing on. And then 3, it starts at 3. It's an open circle, so it's a parentheses. And then it goes on in the positive direction forever, so it's going to infinity. Remember, we use parentheses always with infinity. So the -2 had a parentheses because it was an open circle. The 3 has a parentheses because it's also an open circle. And that is my final answer. Okay, let's look at number 2. So number 2 is pretty similar to number 1. We have an or inequality. 2x plus 7 is greater than 13, or -3x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 10. So what I want you guys to do is just start by solving on your own. 2x plus 7 is greater than 13. So my first step to get x by itself is to subtract the 7 from both sides. So I get 2x is greater than 6. And I'm going to keep going to solve for x. So to get x all by itself, I divide both sides by 2, and I get x is greater than 3. So now go ahead and start solving. -3x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 10. So get x all by itself on this one. So pause me here and try this one on your own. So first thing I did was I undid anything that was being added or subtracted on the same side of the x. So I added 2 to both sides to get -3x is greater than or equal to 12. Then I'm going to keep going. So you had to be careful here because to get x by itself, we had to divide both sides by a -3. And again, when we divide both sides by a negative number, we have to flip the inequality symbol. So it becomes x is less than or equal to -4. So then we're going to graph those. So let's start with just plotting those points. So we have -4. And again, those don't have to be like exact. So -4, x is less than -4. Why did I put -4 first and then 3 second? Because I'm putting them in order from least to greatest. -4 is less than 3, so I'm putting them just like you would on any number line from least to greatest. So x is less than -4, less than or equal to. So is that an open or a closed circle? And that's going to be a closed circle. And less than is going to be going in the negative direction. And then x is greater than 3. So is that an open or a closed circle? That's an open circle at 3. And it's greater than, so it's going in the positive direction. Okay, so to write that in interval notation, I'm looking at it from left to right. So it's going in the negative direction forever and ever. So that's -infinity. So we start with -infinity with a parentheses, always a parentheses with infinity. And then it goes to -4. Now with a closed circle, do I use a parentheses or do I use a bracket? I use a bracket. We have a gap in between, so I use that U for union. It picks up again at 3. 3, is that going to be a parentheses or a bracket? It's a parentheses because it's an open circle. And then it goes on in the positive direction forever. So it's going to infinity. And we always use a parentheses with infinity. And that is my final answer for 2. Okay, let's move on to 3. So what I want you guys to do, I want you guys to try 3 all on your own. I want you guys to first just start by solving the 2x plus 9 is greater than 17, and then solve the 5x plus 10 is less than 10. So try those 2 all on your own, and then come back and check your work. So pause me here and come back to check. So I solved for my first one. I got x is greater than 4. Now I'm going to go ahead and solve for my second one separately. And on the second one, I got x is less than 0. So this is kind of a common area of mistake here. When we do 10 minus 10, we get 0. And then 0 divided by any number is always going to be 0. So that's how we got x is less than 0. So I want you guys to try to graph these 2 on your own. So graph them on the number line and then come back to check your work. So graph those on your own, pause me here, and come back to check your work. Remember, your first and most important thing is to make sure they're in order. So 0 should come before 4 because it's least to greatest. And then less than is an open circle going in the negative direction. And greater than 4 is an open circle going in the positive direction. Okay, so again, I want you guys to try writing an interval notation on your own and then come back to check your work. So you should be coming back to check your work. We're going and looking at it from left to right. From left, it's going in the negative direction forever, which is that negative infinity. So it's negative infinity to 0 with a parentheses. Parentheses on infinity because always. Parentheses on 0 because it's an open circle. There's a gap, so we use u. And then 4 with a parentheses because it's an open circle to infinity because it's going on in the positive direction forever. Okay, so last one with the or inequalities. I want you guys to try 4. Actually, I'll get you started on that one. So there's really 2 different ways that you guys can approach this. You can either approach it by distributing and then solving, or you can divide both sides by -3. If you did divide both sides by -3, remember you're dividing both sides by a negative, so you'd have to flip the inequality symbol. But what I'm going to do is I am going to just distribute the -3 to the 2x and to the 1. So -3 times 2x is -6x, and -3 times +1 is -3. Is less than -15. And then from there, you guys can solve that one on your own. So I want you guys to pause there, and I want you guys to try the rest of this one problem, just this portion of it on your own. Come back to check your work. So for my first one, I got x is greater than 2. So I undid the addition and subtraction first. So I added 3 to both sides. And then to get x by itself, I had to divide both sides by a -6. Really important, again, remember, you need to flip the sign when dividing by a negative number. So instead of being less than, it's now greater than a +2. So then go ahead and solve for the second compound inequality there. So again, we were in a situation, so we had to subtract 1. This is kind of a common area of mistake too. When I bring this down, I have to bring down that negative sign that's attached to the x. And then to get x by itself, I divide both sides by -1, which means I'm flipping the inequality sign to get x is less than or equal to -4. So now that we have our inequalities, I want you guys to try and graph those all on your own. So try and graph that on your own. So I just graphed mine. We have a closed circle at -4 because it's less than or equal to. So because of that or equal to, we always do a closed circle. And then x is greater than 2 is an open circle going in the positive direction. So now try writing it in interval notation on your own and then come back and check your work. So pause me here, try writing your own interval notation and then come back to check your work. Okay. So I got -infinity because it's going in the negative direction forever. to -4 with a bracket because of the closed circle. There's a gap, so we put that union. 2 with a parentheses because it's an open circle going in the positive direction forever, so infinity. So that does it for ORs. To me, the ORs are the easiest ones because it's really just 2 problems built into one. The hardest part is just writing in interval notation, and I really rely on the graph to help me. The biggest thing to remember with OR inequalities and what I set up above, the graphs of OR inequalities will always be going in opposite directions. So if you notice, this one they were going in opposite direction, opposite direction, opposite direction, opposite direction. So every single time OR inequalities should be going in opposite directions. So now let's look at the second type of compound inequality, which is an AND inequality. So an AND inequality, the solutions will be values that must work for both inequalities. So if I kind of go back to my example from before, an AND situation would be you'd have to be taller than 5'6" and older than 20. And so you'd have to meet both of those requirements to get into the building or whatever the scenario is. And so that would be like a real life example of an AND inequality. So you're talking about they have to fit into both categories there. So to solve AND inequalities, you have 2 different methods of solving them. So I'll show you both. This will be method number 1, and then this will be method number 2. So the first method, you can split it into 2 inequalities, solve each inequality separately, then write as one inequality. So kind of like break it up, see how there's like 1 in the middle. And so you can break it up into be 2 and then solve them each separately like we did with the OR inequalities and then write it as 1. Or you can, when solving for x, undo to both sides of the inequalities. So the graphs of AND inequalities will always be, you can cross this out, this doesn't make sense, will always be coming together. So instead of going in the opposite directions, like going away from each other, now they're going to be coming together. So I'm going to show you option number 1 first, and then I'll show you option number 2, and then I'll tell you which one I prefer. So this is what we're going to do for the first one. We're going to solve using option number 1. Okay, so how I do that is I look at them as 2 separate inequalities. So one of the inequalities would be here. -4 is less than x minus 5. And so I'm going to write that as 1. -4 is less than x minus 5. And then the second inequality would be looking at this part. So we still take the x minus 5 and then use the second part, the second half of that. So x minus 5 is less than or equal to -1. And now I just solve those each separately. So I'm going to get x by itself. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And then I get 1 is less than x. Now remember, from the beginning, when we talk about inequalities, you always want to write it as the variable, then the inequality symbol, and then the number. And so I'm going to rewrite this, but I'm going to be careful. So I'm going to write the variable first. I'm going to look at what direction the inequality symbol is facing. Is it facing towards the x or away from the x? And it's facing towards, so we're going to go x is greater than 1. So it's really important when you reverse the order, you need to flip the inequality symbol. So when you reverse the order, you need to flip the inequality symbol. Okay, so I solved one of mine. I got x is greater than 1. Now I'm going to solve the second one. So I'm just going to add 5 to both sides to get x by itself. And I get x is less than or equal to 4. This one is already set up the way that we want it. The x is here, x is first, and then the inequality, and then the number. So we're good. So now that we've done that, we're going to graph it on the same, and then we write it in interval notation. So I'm going to first put 1 and 4 on my number line. I start with 1 because it's less than 4, and then 4. So from there, I look, okay, x is greater than 1, is greater than going to be an open or a closed circle, and it's going to be an open circle. And then I'm just going to look at the open and closed for right now. So x is less than or equal to 4. Less than or equal to, when it's or equal to, it's always a closed circle. So with x is greater than 1, it's going in the positive direction. And when x is less than 4, it's going in the negative direction. So these are coming together, just like I said up here. The graphs of and inequalities will always be coming together. So how do we write these? These are actually, to me, easier to write in interval notation than your or counterparts. The reason is because you don't have to worry about the like union at all. So we look to see, where does it start? It starts at 1. Is it going to be a parentheses or a bracket there? And it's going to be a parentheses at 1. And then it goes on to 4. And is that going to be a parentheses or a bracket? Well, it's going to be a bracket because it's a closed circle. And that's it. That's how we would write it. Okay, so that's using option number 1 when we split it into 2. But now I'm going to show you how to solve it using option number 2. Oops. Having a hard time spelling. Okay, so option 2 is basically when solving for x, undo to both sides of the inequality. So instead of splitting it, when we're getting x by itself, my first step to get x by itself, I would add 5. So what I'm going to do is add 5 here, and I'm also going to add 5 here. So you're adding it to both sides of the inequality symbol. Sometimes, again, just like equals, like equations, it helps to write that line down each one to remind yourself that you need to do it to both sides of the line. So -7 plus 5 is -2. This stays the same, x, less than 7 plus 5, which is 12. Oops, I didn't bring the 2 down. And again, okay, we're still trying to get x by itself. It's attached to that 2. That 2 is being multiplied. So to undo the 2 from both sides, we're going to divide the middle by 2, which means we divide the left by 2 and the right by 2. So -2 divided by 2 is -1, less than or equal to x, which is less than 6. So the trick here is kind of understanding what that means. And so again, we kind of are stuck with something that we have up here. We have -1 is less than or equal to x. But again, we always want to think about it as a variable, then the inequality symbol, and then the number. So what we're going to do is we're going to go x. The inequality symbol is facing towards the x. So it's going to be x is greater than or equal to -1. And then this one's a little bit easier. This one's just x is less than 6. So then we can just graph that on one graph. So I have -1 and then 6. Remember, we're doing it in order from least to greatest. -1 is greater than or equal to. So that or equal to is going to be a closed circle. And then less than 6 is going to be an open circle, because it doesn't have that extra line. So greater than -1 is going in the positive direction. Less than 6 is going in the negative direction. So those are, as we knew they would, coming together and meeting. So to write that in interval notation, we go from left to right. So we start with -1. -1 is a closed circle, so we have a bracket at -1. Goes on to 6, and 6 is a parentheses because it's an open circle. Okay, so you've seen both options. Now you can kind of decide which option do you think is best for you? Which one do you feel most comfortable with? And so that's what I want you guys to use and try with number 3. I'll tell you which one I prefer. I prefer the second option. I think that one to me is more straightforward. So I'm going to do the second option on 3. But what I want you guys to do is I want you just to pause me here, and I want you guys to try whichever option you prefer, try it on your own. So pause me and solve 3 on your own. So first step I did was I undid the subtraction from the middle. So I added 4, which means I add 4 to the left, I add 4 to the right. So -16 plus 4 is -12, less than or equal to 3x, which is less than or equal to 6. Keep going. So the last step to get x by itself, it was being multiplied by that 3, so we needed to divide it by 3. So that means we need to divide the left by 3 and the right by 3. So -12 divided by 3 is -4, less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 2. So from there, we can kind of see, okay, we have -4 is less than or equal to x. We're going to rewrite it so it's variable inequality than number. So that means x. The symbol is facing the x, so that's going to be x is greater than or equal to -4. And then this one, x is less than or equal to 2. So what I want you guys to do is using that information, I want you guys to try and graph that one on your own. So graph that one on your own and then come back and check your work. First thing I did is I made sure I ordered them from least to greatest. So -4 comes first and then 2. Close circle for both of them because it's the or equal to. So that extra line at the bottom always tells me it's a closed circle. And then we know they're going to be coming together, but we always double check. X is greater than or equal to -4 is going in the positive, and less than or equal to 2 is going in the negative, which makes sense. They are coming together. So now what I want you guys to do is try to write this in interval notation on your own. So try this on your own to just write it in interval notation and then come back to check your work. Okay, you should be checking your work at this point. We're going again from left to right. So we start at -4. Is that going to be a parentheses or a bracket? It's a bracket at -4. It goes on to 2 with another bracket because they're both closed circles. Okay, last example is going to be number 4. So what I want you guys to do, again, use the method of your choice. If you're going to split them up, split them up. If you're going to keep them together and just do whatever you want to both sides, do that method. But then come back and check your work. So solve the entire problem for 4 and then come back to check your work. So I just added 13 to all sides of my compound inequality, and then I divided all sides by 7. And I have x is greater than -2 and x is less than 3. So now what I want you guys to do is graph that on your own. So graph that and then come back to check your work. Okay, so those are both open circles because they're not the or equal to. So both of those are open circles coming together because greater than -2 is going in the positive and less than 3 is going in the negative. Now I want you guys to write it in interval notation on your own. So it starts at -2, open circle with a parentheses, goes on to 3 with a parentheses, and that's it. So that does it for compound inequalities. Again, if you guys have any questions, you guys can always bring them to class so we can go over them together. This should be glued into your spiral or taped into your spiral, however you are doing it. But remember, you should be writing these down, whether you're writing it down on a piece of paper or you're writing them into the guided notes. You need to be writing the notes down. That's the only way you guys are going to learn this and the only way you guys are going to be successful. So please let me know if you guys have any questions and have a great day. I will see you guys soon. Bye, guys.